Welcome back. And I had a technical difficulty, so I had to stop the program and then restart again for tonight, which is the second night of the Democratic Convention. And wanted just to have a few comments about the talks today, which really were overall cover the various spectrums. And really the key piece that I wanted to speak on is the gathering that took place with various representatives of American Muslim community. And one part of the meeting had or listed on the list of speakers in the program was Linda Sarsour. And a number of complaints and a number of posts on Twitter and so on, including by Jake Tabor from CNN, who never misses an opportunity to actually be anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, as well as push on the Zionist Israel framing. So he's also jumped onto the bandwagon and asking the Democratic Party, as well as the Biden campaign, to distance itself from Linda Sarsour. With many possibly of the Zionist activists and the pro-Israel activists rallying and trying to again pile on the attack on Linda Sarsour to try to make sure that she is pushed out of any impact or any type of mainstream political engagement. And again, I don't put much stock with the mainstream. Mainstream, basically, you don't say anything that anyone would listen to. You don't push on the issues that will actually get something done. And you basically just maintain the status quo. And if anything, that's been part of the problem, not only of the Democratic Party, but others, that the status quo is what got people to the problem that we are facing, and I would say got Trump elected, because it just basically making sure that the existing political elites in the country get their say and get their influence while keeping the majority of Americans, communities of colors and others on not actually having a say or an impact. You just come out every 2 years to vote or every 4 years. So this is another aspect of the problem relative to Muslims being able to engage politically. And basically you have to be politically engaged, but not to bring your issues onto the table. It's actually to be possibly deaf, blind, and mute in order for you to engage in the political shenanigans that often take place. So political participation and democracy is contingent on you being able to put your issues forward. And let's be very clear, Muslims have a number of issues that are very critical for us. First and foremost, the continued violation of our civil rights. Muslims are constantly subject to hyper surveillance and hyper securitization, and the constant surveillance, sending infiltrators to community organizations and groups, using pernicious material support to railroad Muslims into the legal process, constant demonization. And it seems that the only time that you're being asked to participate is when you are asked to come in because you are the problem. So in essence, one is actually can recall the book, How Does It Feel to Be a Problem? In essence, how does it feel to be a Muslim, which you are framed as a problem? And the Democratic Party, let's be very clear, not only the Republicans, but the Democratic Party itself, right, in terms of its establishment, and I would say also encompasses some aspect of the left, are all have absorbed the Islamophobic imaginary, meaning that in their imagination, in the social imaginary of the society, in the political machineries, that the Muslim is a problem. He doesn't fit into the society, and therefore there's often a whole project of intervention to try to civilize the Muslim, or bringing him into modernity, or some of these smart aleck come lately that Islam need reformation, and some of Muslims who basically don't even know the direction to Mecca, let alone being able to articulate anything, also have internalized this Islamophobic social imaginary and begin to act upon it. So this is what we're experiencing in this attack on Linda Sarsour, but more importantly, that the issues that the Muslims care about, broadly speaking, in terms of our civil rights, human rights, justice here domestically, we'll set aside the international aspect to the side for a minute, but our civil rights are subject to curtailment. We're not equal citizens, let's just be very clear. We're citizens on probation. Our citizenship does not have the same standing or same equality, and we're not unique in that. Often you hear me speak about the experience of Black Americans, the experience of Latino Americans. Black Americans, their citizenship have never been treated as equal. They're constantly subject to differentiated treatment in relations to their citizenship, because if they were citizen at the foundation of the country, they should have been able to exercise the full rights that are enshrined in the citizenship. First and foremost about it is the right to vote, which we know has been subject to curtailment. We had to have many Civil Rights Act passed and many renewal of civil rights legislation just to be able to have a ability to participate and engage as equal. And we're still, to this point, we're still having a differentiated treatment, and the citizenship is not equal. A white citizen, and I'm not talking about in terms of the text, all men are created equal. The text says that all are equal, but in terms of how it's applied on a daily basis, and the ramification of the daily practices in society, it's not equal citizenship. And Muslims today in America are unequal citizens. They're citizens on probation. They're asked to both demonstrate and perform their citizenship to the gaze of the other, in particular the gaze of the white American society in particular, and the racist part of it, but also I would say both sides, Democrat and Republican, are asking Muslims to engage in performing their citizenship, that we have to demonstrate our citizenship to the other. And this is what makes it unequal in relations to a Muslim, that you have to actually demonstrate it to an external other, that you have a rights of citizenship that equal to everyone else. I often say that Muslims in the contemporary period, as a result of this Islamophobic social imaginary, which Jake Tapper just represented, is that you don't even have the pleasure of thinking stupid thoughts to your own self, that you have to edit your own mind because you're subject to this hyper surveillance, hyper securitization, hyper Islarization, and hyper differentiated treatment. All right. So much so that you don't even recognize that this treatment is as such. You take it as it almost becomes the norm. So even if we study and we examine what constitutes Islamophobia, that the level of what we think Islamophobic discourses is at, it has to be such a high threshold that we don't even understand the variety of the everyday normal patterns of Islamophobic discourses. So here in the Democratic Convention, Muslims are subject to total erasure. And our issues are not in the platform. Again, we'll give credit that Biden and others want to remove the Muslim ban, and it's a praiseworthy step. I'm not gonna not recognize certain elements that are positive, but the question is about the Patriot Act. The question is about the CVE, countering violent extremism, and the surveillance. The question is about the 15,000 FBI agent and informant that have been unleashed on the community. The continued use of material support. The various ways of the joint terrorism task forces that are intertwined with local policing. And as we also see in relation to the current protest movement, that the police has utilized the joint terrorism task forces as well as collecting information on legitimate exercise of First Amendment rights, the right to organize, to protest, the right to speak. And we have seen that information collection as well as the spying and using all kinds of intrusions on the larger protest movement, but also Muslims have experienced this for quite some time. So in essence, these issues are not there, are not represented. Now, when we speak about the international front, this is where it becomes a little bit what you call a mixed bag in here. Definitely there are statements in relations to the Muslim in China, the Uyghur community, and it's rightfully so to speak against it. But I also would add that in here, it's being used as a football game in relations to the pressure and the tension with China, that this becomes a point that is raised not at actually of a deep conviction that this is something wrong that needs to be opposed and stopped, and to continue to actually raise the human rights issues and concerns. But similarly, it's also to have to be consistent in relations to the human rights of Muslims in India, in relations to Kashmir, in relations to the BJP party and the whole use of Hindutva. And the Biden campaign has been cozy to the activists from the American Hindu Foundation, and in essence, not taking Modi to task with his Hindu nationalism that targets not only Muslims, but Sikhs, Christians, the Dalit, which is the lower castes, or what's called the untouchables, that there is no systematic engagement on that subject whatsoever. And then if we really want to come close this discussion about Iran and how speaking about how to be tough on Iran and so on, which is really this double speak of constant attempt to intervene in the affairs of Iran, and to try to replicate this again in interventionist policies in relations to Iran, and then also speaking other places around, and then utter silence, total silence, not only silence in relations to Palestinian human rights and their calls for freedom, ending the occupation, ending and dismantling settlements, complete silence. No, what you have is actually a continued framing that Biden, Harris, and the Democratic Party, and here we're speaking about Democratic Party leadership and establishment, are touting their credentials of being pro-Israel. So the question that I need to raise in here is, what is the difference between Sheldon Adelson's support of Trump and getting Trump whatever he desires relative to Israel policy, U.S. policy on Israel, including the appointment of David Friedman as U.S. ambassador, and Kushner going around as a person that has almost his hand in every element, going around as being the specialist in relations to handle the Middle East peace, and I don't say peace plan, the Middle East IPO, initial public offering for Israeli influence. So what is the Democratic Party point of difference if, in Athens, the establishment is still being committed today to Israel in the way that it is? So we have issues relative to our civil rights here domestically in relations to the Muslim community, and also our African-American Muslim community likewise, issues that are there relative to the incarceration, the prison industrial complex. I think Biden and the Democratic Party have to really go through a 12-step program, if not more step program, to undo the embedded legacy of racism, embedded legacy of using racial discourses that ends up with 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 Black men end up entangled in the unjustice system. I don't call it justice system, it's the unjustice system. And for Muslims also, there are a large number of our Black brothers who are in prison actually end up embracing Islam, as well as being one of those areas where Islam is having an impact. So we read the narrative of Malcolm X, but every day there is a Malcolm X that is actually entangled in the prison industrial complex. And I can't really speak of the prison without bringing the issue of Imam Jamil Amin and his continued wrong imprisonment, even though the evidence shows and the call for a new trial. There's so many of these cases that really we need to take the Democratic Party to task, especially, again, they want to embrace various aspects, whether it's the Black Lives Matter, or they want to put themselves in the forefront that they're for diversity. But again, we need to go beyond just using terms of diversity, using a selection of one of each to put an array, and we have to actually call for some comprehensive transformation of a society away from its racist legacy, which I would say the Democratic Party has a heavy load of it. The fact that it's a two-party system, but they all have the same racist coin that is emboldened and implanted in it, the long legacy of racism in this country. So those are issues that we need to assert. I also call for transformation of our educational system. So we do need some comprehensive and holistic educational reform. Individuals don't come out racist as they're born. They're socialized, educated, brought into structures that make them recreate the system that we are living in today. So it's not enough to say, well, we need to stop racism. No, we need to actually engage in changing and altering and de-racializing the society. It's not enough to say that I am against racism. You have to be anti-racist and work in a systematic way. And for me, education is one of those areas that paramount, because what we educate our kids in school and at the universities, we still educate them in a Eurocentric, racial hierarchical in relations to the worldview and such we produce them into the world or good them out to the world to reproduce the world that is there. You change the education, you change the emphasis, you change the curriculum, and you transform that curriculum, then we could begin to actually make a major inroads to transforming the society. And that work needs to be done in a very systematic way, and as much as also transforming the economy. So the economy is still structured with heavy embeddedness in it in terms of racial epistemic, not only the prison industrial complex, but military industrial complex. Public housing is an industrial complex. The entertainment and sport is an industrial complex. All is structured to drive resources from the poor, from the disenfranchised, from the middle class, to the top echelon of our society. If you want to use the term 1%, you could use the 1%, but it is those who are continually benefited from the long history of racism and continue to actually benefit from the various layers that we have in relations to our society. Just, I always think, if you talk about public housing is one of the major engine of wealth transformation from the poor and the middle class to those who end up owning property. So again, the public housing is funded through the federal allocations, Section 8 and so on. But who owns these properties? You have individuals who own the property, and then the poor are the avenue for generating profit for many of these property owners. So in this sense, it is an industrial complex. And I actually know individuals that collect $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 plus from the federal government on a monthly basis through these rental properties that are allocated and dedicated to housing the poor. But remember in here that the payment that is coming from the federal government is actually coming from our taxes. And we know that the large sums of money that comes actually from the poor and middle class. So in this sense, the public housing industrial complex is not actually structured to take people out of poverty. It's not structured to make people own their home, which is, again, one of the important elements of trying to actually bring individuals into some notions of wealth and well-being. So in this sense, what we need is a transformation. If the dollars that are coming to support the housing needs of those who are disenfranchised and the margin of society, then we should find a way to actually to give them real ownership of their homes and use that as the mechanism. And we know that the accumulative wealth that has been accumulated over generations, especially by the white segment of society, is directly related to ownership of land and property and housing and so on. So that's, again, is very, very important for us as we think of the issues that we put on the table at this point relative to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in the debate at this particular time, and why we should call for a complete transformation, education, economy, environment, the Green Deal that many of the Democrats, at least at the grassroots, are embracing. These are the issues that have to be there. And I think as Muslims, these are the issues that likewise we actually are calling for. So we should not shy away from it. So that's a set of issues that I wanted to address today. The second piece that I also wanted to point to is that today, earlier in the morning, there was a release. There was an article that came out in the Jerusalem Post that said that the the spokesperson of the Sudanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that there is no reason for our continued hostility or a state of war with Israel, and that we look forward to having a peace or a peace treaty or a peace, a path toward peace in here, which really came on the back of the United Arab Emirates calling for normalizing relations and having a peace deal with Israel. And yesterday also, they signed the first part of it, which is a trade agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. And Sudan has been in the flux of political instability for quite some time. That the previous government and the previous president was sent to jail for corruption. And part of that is the United Arab Emirates also intervened and wanted to play a role with the new emerging political body that is emerging in Sudan. And it seems that through both coaxing as well as influence and financial contribution, it seems, again, I'm going to hold judgment on what the Sudanese government will do. I do know that the population in Sudan, the people of Sudan, have been some of the most vocal and consistent supporters of Palestine and Palestinians, not only in the Arab world, but also in the diaspora in many places. Actually, our Sudanese brothers and sisters have been always in the forefront in their commitment to rally around Palestine. So it raises, again, the issue of what are the lines of influence. And I think in here, United Arab Emirates is using its financial contribution, as well as its financial resources on the one hand, as well as its engagement with the military in Sudan to try to possibly bring about a Sudanese-Israel reapproachment. But I don't think it's going to be an easy path. I think the political mobilization in Sudan is much further advanced than the Gulf states. This is a society that is vibrant. This is a society that also went through colonization itself with the British colonization. It had a long history of struggle against the British, winning and confronting the British during their colonial past. But it also emerged from the colonial period and had a vibrant civil society with vibrant organization, labor unions, mobilization and organization in various segments. It is also the most recent movement. One see also the impact and the contribution of the Sudanese women who were also in the forefront. So in this sense, it's not going to be an easy sell in Sudan itself, again, assuming that even if United Arab Emirates brought its influence, financial influence, political influence, contribution to bear, I don't think it is a settled issue, considering the type of dynamic society that you have in Sudan, as well as its long historical commitment as well in terms of being a very strong Islamic community that continue to really have adherence as well as understandings of the Islamic tradition. So the relationship in here are very important. Another dimension that might be at play in here is the tension in South Sudan, between the South Sudan and Sudan in here, and Israel has played a role in the conflict that led in the region. So I wouldn't be surprised that also some of that engagement of Israel through its intelligence services as well as supplies of weapons and training, that is being also played as one of the cards to bring Sudan into the table for a peace negotiations in this sense. And lastly, it's also part of the regional dynamic in terms of what is the relationship between Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia, and whether the possibility of this treaty or possible treaty with Israel is also being shaped around the dynamics in the Horn of Africa and being offered as one of the possibilities of stabilizing that region. So again, those are some of the discussions or the issues that are there. Some others, other than Sudan, I think there is also discussions about Saudi Arabia and whether Saudi Arabia is likewise will follow suit. And we'll see on whether that takes place. Bahrain, Oman, and Morocco. Mauritania issued a statement yesterday supporting United Arab Emirates peace deal with Israel and the normalization, while also having double speak that they're committed to the Palestinian rights and bringing justice to the Palestinians, which in essence is like, where do you cash that statement? Which account? Again, this is from the Mauritanian government. I would rather for them just to say we support the United Arab Emirates and not to actually have a double speak and saying that we stand with the Palestinians, because what does that mean? What does standing with the Palestinians mean if you're actually, on the one hand, normalizing relations and having Mauritania has diplomatic relations with Israel, they have an Israeli embassy, and then they are, in essence, lauding and celebrating the United Arab Emirates opening relations with Israel and normalizing relations. So this is a settler colonial state. Israel have apartheid. It is already encroached on Palestine. The past 7 days, Israel has been bombing Gaza. Yesterday, they demolished a major building with 8 families in Jerusalem. So for those who say, well, we stand with the Palestinians while we call for normalization of Israel, I really want to know, what does that mean? Where can we actually bring this into substantiation? Because if you stand for justice for the Palestinians, then you have signed on the 4 Geneva Convention. You're a signatory to it. 4 Geneva Convention called for prohibition of moving civilian population into occupied land, which is all the settlements. And any benefits that going from the settlements and so on is illegal. So let me ask the Mauritania, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Egypt, and all these countries that are running. How do you make sure that the trade deals that you're making with Israel does not have products that are coming from the settlers and settlements? Since the settlements are illegal under the 4 Geneva Convention, they're illegal also under the United Nations, Resolution 242338 and subsequent resolutions. So how do you make sure that this is not the case? When Israelis come and visit your country, are you allowing settlers to come and visit your country? So if you are, then you are violations of the 4 Geneva Convention, because you're opening and putting a stamp of free movement for settlers who are in violations of the 4 Geneva Convention, and also could be taken that it's actually a war crime that is being unfolding in the Palestinian territories. So if you issue a statement that you stand for the Palestinians, it's like, what is it? Is it just like summer fruits? So today the flavor would say we support the Palestinians while we have trade agreement with Israel. We welcome a new delegation from Israel, from all those who live in the settlements, from those who live in this expanded greater Jerusalem that all have been taken of Palestinian lands and properties. Are we going to allow Israeli olive oil to be brought into the Arab world? So all of a sudden, United Arab Emirates will have olive oil. Now, you know that Palestinian trees have been stolen, literally stolen, loaded up, and taken into Israel proper. So you literally are purchasing an olive oil in a bottle that itself is containing a stolen byproduct of a stolen land and a stolen tree. And as such, you're actually participating in a war crime that is not only committed against the Palestinians as people, but also against their environment, their trees, their land, and their society. Even, okay, if you take it to 48, all the lands in 48, or the overwhelming part of the 48 lands, were confiscated from Palestinians. These are the lands that belong to the Palestinian refugees. So, mashallah, you're saying you support the Palestinians and you want them to have their rights. Well, how about the right of return? How about their right to their land that has been stolen? I know some of you are so happy to facilitate Zionists coming to visit their historical land sites, visiting some historical and renovating some historical synagogues. Again, I am not against any type of religious expressions of religious feelings and sentiments. But have you stopped and asked about Israel that have taken all the mosques in 1948 areas? In Haifa, in Jaffa, in Asqalan, in Akka, in all of the villages. Some of them have been transformed into resting sites, some into bars, some into restaurants. So I know ignorance is blessed, but compounded ignorance is not blessed. This is compounded ignorance at its most. And some of these Arab governments that are issuing these statements, I'd rather for them to be silent. Even if you want to go and hug a Zionist, even if you go and hug Netanyahu, who his own electorate and his own population don't want to hug him because he has so many corruption cases standing in courts. If you want to hug him, just hug him. But please don't just try to wipe your hug by putting Palestine or Palestinians in there in your statements. At least have what you call the basic, I don't want to say basic dignity, because anyone that goes and embraces settler colonialism and embraces Israel and goes around to embrace an apartheid state, this is what it is. It's an apartheid state. And to try to get some dealing, and maybe you're going to go and get a suntan and visit Tel Aviv and go in there because you want to do club hopping or whatever it is. Whatever you want to do, just please don't include that you're doing this for the Palestinians, like what the United Arab Emirates, that this is going to rescue the Palestinian from annexation. Excuse me? Israel have been annexing continuously since '67. And do you think just because you want a trade deal and you want to come and visit and get a suntan, and all of a sudden you're going to hop and knob around with Netanyahu, and you think that you're going to have influence in various Western countries, that Israel is going to stop annexation? Even the day after, they said we're not going to stop annexation. It is only suspending just a statement, but rather both the Likud as well as Netanyahu said that none of that is going to actually occur. So this is, I wanted to just give some comment both on the Sudan, on the one hand, the statement that came out of Mauritania, and then the trade deal that also have been announced between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. On the positive side, I have to give some positive. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, actually put out a very strong statement in Urdu that's translated, is available on my Facebook. He said he will actually not go for it. And I could just actually, in a minute, maybe go and say what exactly he said. So we'll actually appreciate his statement on this front. And this is, he said toward the end, he said, look, a person always has to make a decision. I always say that there is a difference between an animal and a human being. Animals come into this world, they eat, drink, and procreate before they are gone. Whereas we human beings are answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the next life regarding our actions. So when you talk about Israel and Palestine, then can we answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way Palestinians are mistreated, oppressed, are not given their rights? Can we abandon them? My conscience will never allow me to do that. He said to accept Israel. I can never do that. So this is very positive. Imran Khan from the Prime Minister of Pakistan actually putting out a strong statement opposing the United Arab Emirates Israel deal, even though that Pakistan is facing a very difficult financial situation. And I know that the Gulf states have been always trying to pressure Pakistan on a number of fronts and to try to use their financial resources. For some time, they wanted Pakistan to join the war on Yemen, and I think Imran Khan was very wise, and Pakistani leadership was very wise, and they did not bite into it. And I know there's some certain corners within Pakistan that they are urging Pakistani leadership to do reapproachment with Israel. And I know there's some in the US that also want to do that, but let's not confuse those with the long-standing position in Pakistan that goes back all the way to the formation of Pakistan itself, simultaneously at the same time that Palestine came under Zionist occupation in 1947, and the legacy also in terms of the Kashmir and the relationship that are there, and then the closeness between India and Israel, considering that Israel helped India develop its nuclear program. So that's on the positive that Imran Khan had a very positive statement. The other is also a Tunisian woman by the name of Amani bin Ali. She's one of the champions in Arabic language reading and Arabic language competition. The competition was being held in United Arab Emirates. She actually withdrew from the competition and saying that she will not participate in a competition in a country that is actually engaging in التطبيع. It's تطبيع, translated normalization is much more impactful than normalization. So, and again, in here she announced that her withdrawal from the competition. And then the other is also that in Kuwait, that both the Kuwaiti parliament as well as a number of thinkers, one author actually withdrew his books from being distributed in United Arab Emirates, and then the community in Kuwait had a solidarity stand and a gathering outside of the Palestine embassy in Kuwait to express its support and solidarity and its refusal to go down through the normalization path. So that's very positive as well in relations to these developments. So those are the issues that I wanted to put on the table today. And hopefully that this is of benefit to all those who have joined me. These are just my thoughts for the night, both from looking at the Democratic Convention and the comments in there, as well as some of the development in relation to Palestine and other places. So thank you for joining me, and assalamu alaikum, and we'll see you again soon.